everyone, and very welcome to all of you. So we are going to have discussions from for next 10 lectures on Introduction to International Relations. That's a paper for you for semester 4th, I guess. So today is the first lecture, and I'm sorry for the technical glitches. And we are going to have an introductory class today. First, I'm going to tell you about the paper, what you're going to read in this, what you're going to understand in this, and plus how it is relevant in today's world. And of course, that includes a discussion, a short discussion on the syllabus. And of course, I'm going to introduce you to the various concepts which you will be, we'll be going into details later as and when we progress in the lectures. Right. So first of all, let me talk about the syllabus and well, I'm not able to share the syllabus this time, but next time I'm sure pakka I'll get it and मैं आपको भेज भी दूंगी and syllabus की copy, but I'm sure all of you have it right now. If you look closely in the syllabus, first of all, this paper is about Introduction to International Relations. So, इसमें दो तीन चीजें हैं समझने की. By far, the idea of introducing the international relations concept doesn't mean that we are going to talk about only the contemporary or the current, uh, um, relations which India or other countries share with each other. So, very clearly, अगर आप अपने syllabus में देखेंगे, then there are three different parts. There are three sections which we have to cover. I will take up again another, discussion on the syllabus, if at all, time permits in the other lectures. But right now, let me tell you that there are three different parts in the syllabus, and that's how I have also designed your lectures. The first part is all about, it says the early debates in international relations. That early debates means, now that you have already cleared your first and second semester, to understand any subject, it's very, very important to have a conceptual clarity, to have a theoretical understanding into that paper. So ये जो first part है, this clearly tells us all about what is international relations. जिसमें कि your different perspectives, different concepts, different approaches, all right, and the terms, key terms, whatever we use, and how international relations has evolved. See, as far as international relations as an academic subject is concerned, it's not a very old one, right? It is relatively a very, very young or a new subject, right? So perhaps it gained a lot of importance after post-Second World War. 1945 scenario, this subject grew majorly in the academic scenario. उससे पहले क्या था? This was clubbed under political science, history, economics, little bit, bits and pieces में हम लोग इसको पढ़ रहे थे, analyze कर रहे थे. लेकिन full-fledged जो है, वो 1919 के बाद it came into its full, it gained academic status. So, being a relatively new subject, which means that various people and various perspectives, various opinions, different kind of thinking has gone into the making of this subject. Okay? So, the first portion, that is early debates on international relations, allows us to understand these different perspectives. So, इनको हम approaches भी कहते हैं, right? So, different approaches, जिसमें कि हम कुछ approaches को बहुत ज़्यादा detail में करेंगे, owing to your syllabus and as part of your syllabus, and other approaches we'll just touch upon because we want to know किस तरह की understanding जो है वो international relations as a subject, as a discipline बनने में जाती है. और इसी में ही, इसी introduction में ही, I would like to talk about the scope of international relations. How is it different from international politics, or is it different or not? बहुत बार international relations, international politics, a lot of people use it, it's like in a similar fashion. But actually, there is a very minute difference between these two. So we are going to take it up, and the different concepts like national interest, किसको कहते हैं, collective security, these terms जो आपके बार बार बहुत सारे reference point में आएंगे, so these terms and these concepts we are going to take it up in the introduction portion. Then we will do the approaches. Approaches में सबसे जो important approaches हैं, that is realism and idealism. So whenever we are going to study these approaches, these are also called traditional approaches. So these two approaches जो हैं, we are going to probably do it in a comparative fashion, right? In comparison to each other. We'll try to understand realism versus idealism. Then we have other approaches like systems approach, dependency approach, and feminist approach. Being from the new era, feminist approach सबसे नया perspective है international relations को लेकर. So we will also look into that. It's very important to understand this gender inequality जो कि prevail करता है amongst the international organizations and international policies, etc., that the feminist theorists are trying to make us understand. Right, this is the first unit. Then second unit is all about what happened, you know, what are the events, what are the, let's say, landmarks that we talk about when we talk about international relations. And the one very important such event is Cold War. So our whole international relations somehow revolves around pre and post Cold War era, right? There was one kind of behavior all nations were exhibiting before World War II, and after World War II, there have been seemingly different perspectives and opinions that have emerged across the globe. So that we have to study, and the relations, the nature of relations between two states, states as in countries. So how they have changed, how they have evolved. That is the second unit. जिसमें हम लोग we will also connect with all the developments, changing developments across the globe. And one such big change was the disintegration of USSR and how it impacted all the other countries and their relationships with each other. That is the second portion. And the third unit, the last one, is all about India and its relations with the other countries, with its neighbors, with its other trade ties, and basically the foreign policy. How India has been viewed and India is viewing the world. So, you know, these two perspectives we are going to take up. First is that by studying its foreign policy, we understand what India expects from rest of the countries, what are the standards it has set for itself. And second perspective is how the, you know, the world has responded to it, and whether it is going according to the terms or not. You know, those kind of ideas. जो current scenario है अभी इंडिया का, आप जान ही रहे हैं, there are so many changes which are going on across the globe internationally. So that is what current जो है, India and its relations with other countries, India's foreign policy, what are its challenges, what are its demerits, what are its merits. That is all we are going to take up in the last unit. All right. So these are the three different units, and on an average, we are going to spend 4 lectures on each of these units. All right. So today we are going to go and start with the introduction. Introduction as in I'm going to introduce a little bit into the subject, into the discipline, and also the approaches, a little bit of the approaches we'll do. Okay. Yeah. So, right. Okay. So we're going to start with yes, right. So I'm unable to share this notes with you right now, but I may be able to provide you with these kind of notes later, and you know, how SOL permits, I may be able to share it later on with you people. Okay, so international relations. What is international? Let's just try to understand that. International relations is an area in political science that deals with the relations amongst different sovereign states. It studies the behavior of the states with each other and with other international entities. It also attempts to examine the conflicts and cooperation among states, the functions and roles of different international organizations and their mechanisms like UN and World Trade Organizations and the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And you know, It also tries to understand and study the role of multinational corporations, because now you know that MNCs have a major role to a major say in the international arena and the policies. So the working of state and non-state actors, uh, also international relations comments and takes up talks about the new challenges like climate change, terrorism, the new issues which have engulfed all these countries, like problem of refugees, migrants, etc., etc. So understanding internationals will help us in exploring and offering different visions of the world order, which can hopefully further the cause of global peace. So the idea of understanding international relations is how can we build more peace and restore more peace in the world. Right, so the study of international relations among nations has fascinated scholars. Now we'll look into the academic thing, like how it has evolved as a study, and we'll also talk about few important thinkers, how they have viewed international relations. So the study of relations among nations has fascinated scholars for several centuries, okay, for many years. However, the term international was first used by Jeremy Bentham. ये नाम आपने पहले भी सुना होगा in utilitarian tradition in political theory in your first semester. So Jeremy Bentham, the first person to use the term international while explaining the relations between different states. And in the later part of the 18th century, there was also a Latin equivalent, a Latin word called intergenitus, that was used by a person called Richard Joux, but it was much later than Bentham in 19th century. So both of them had used this term in respect of the branch of law that was called law of nations. So earlier it was used to be called the law of nations, how the rules and which governs us, how to behave in the world. Okay, that later became international law. During the 19th and 20th centuries, international relations have grown rapidly. Today, nation states have become far too independent, and the relations amongst them, whether political or those related to trade and commerce, have developed into an essential area of knowledge. By merely understanding the idea of how a country goes into trading with others and those other exchanges it has with other countries, we can infer a lot of information about that country. Okay, so today, in fact, after the Second World War, majorly, this interdependence of sovereign states has grown immensely. Like I said, the rapid developments have taken place, which has impacted all the countries across the globe. Meanwhile, in the present jet age, as we call it, traveling has become so rampant, it is so rapid that distances have been reduced. Of course, and with the revolution in the field of communication, we have social medias. Today's digital era has brought people so close to each other that international discipline has assumed unprecedented importance, both as a condition and as a discipline. Okay, now let's see what this particular statement, when I use the word as a condition and as a discipline, how do we differentiate that? These two terms were picked by Quincy Wright. Quincy Wright used this kind of distinction to explain the nature of the subject called international relations. So according to him, however, the word interstate would have been more accurate, because political science, the state term is used more frequently, but uh, uh, international relations may conditions refers to the facts of international life, like the actual conduct of relations amongst different nations through diplomacy and based on particularly the foreign policy. So it also includes areas of cooperation, conflict, and also war. So according to Wright, international relations should basically be telling the truth about the subject. That is, how such relations are to be conducted. All right. It's the application of international laws and rules and regulations. Okay. And as a discipline, international relations should treat them in a scientific and systematic manner. That means as a discipline, it should be exploring the possibility of, better laws and rules, whether it is possible to have them and apply them in the world scenario. So, in other words, international relations should focus on the study of all relations, whether political, diplomatic, trade, academic, among sovereign states, right? Which constitute the subject matter of international relations. However, the scope of international relations should include varied types of group nations. It is not only about the sovereign states anymore, but the relationships between group nations, between the states, between governments, between people, between regions, between alliances, between confederations, between international organizations, even industrial organizations, all those commerce chambers and commerce organizations, cultural organizations, religious organizations, etc., etc., which means it is so broad and wide that it encompasses virtually all the organizations which happen to shape the nature of a state. Okay. So while Quincy Wright distinguished between international relations as a condition and a discipline, as we just saw, there are other scholars like Palmer and Perkins who doubted it as a status, as a discipline. They severely doubted that it had something very, very unique to offer. They argued that history and political science are the disciplines from which international relations has emerged. Like I told you before, that it has always been a part of the other disciplines, right? So, of course, Palmer and Perkins were writing about 40 years ago, and they had opined at that time, but it's a very important name. So you must understand that although international relations has emerged from its earlier status as a poor relation of political science and history, it is still far from being a well-organized discipline. So basically, they never agreed to the fact that international relations can be independently recognized as a subject matter. It can only be studied under the heads of political science and history. That's what they opined. So one of the earliest scholars of international relations, Professor Alfred Zimmermann, had written before the Second World War that international relations is clearly not a subject in the ordinary sense of the word. It does not provide a single coherent body of teaching material. He is in agreement with Palmer and Perkins. It is not a single subject, but a bundle of subjects like law, economics, political science, geography, commerce, so on. So international relations was too subjective, and the character and content were also very subjective, and that's why it can never be there is a never single coherent theory of international relations as such. It can be only studied under different disciplines. Okay, so one very important, again another very important name, E.H. Carr, historian E.H. Carr, we have to understand his take up his opinions as well. In its early stages, even E.H. Carr had described it as markedly and frankly utopian. Nobody believed actually at that time that such a subject, such a discipline can be of any importance, right? But the failure of League of Nations and its collective security led Carr to remark that it had become possible to embark on serious and critical analytical thought about international problems. So this has been vigorously pursued by a number of scholars after the Second World War. So there was a slight hope that there is a possibility that the way nations conduct themselves in the world stage, it's important to study it in order to prevent these kind of catastrophic events. Okay. So today, rather, it will be improper to describe international relations as utopian. Utopian means something which is imaginary, fictitious, something which does not exist, only in your imagination. So right now, it's very impossible kind of a thing to deny its existence, the international relations as a subject, as a discipline. We can't deny it, and we can't say that it's a new utopian existence. If the status of an independent subject of study, we understand that national interest concerns every state today, and national interest, it's one term, national interest is of a lot of importance today. Okay. Planners and makers of foreign policy of any country, they cannot ignore correct perception of their country's national interest, okay, which must be protected at all cost. So in this respect, we may agree with what Hartman is saying. He's saying that international relations as a field of study, it focuses upon the processes by which states adjust their national interests to those of others. That's what you generally do, protect your own national interests, keeping in mind friendly and healthy relationships with others. Okay, but again, since national interests of different states are often in conflict with each other, naturally, no two states can have same goals. It's very likely that Hans Morgenthau's ideas would come alive, because he says that international politics, like all other politics, is a struggle of power. Hans Morgenthau is a big name which is associated with the realism approach. We'll go into detail when we do the realism approach in detail. However, the idea of power is something which he talks about. He says that all politics, and especially the international politics, is all about struggle for power. Therefore, power is the means through which nations promote their national interests, how they assert themselves in the international arena, and that's how the relationships are defined. Okay. Academically speaking, now this was how people see it through different perspectives. Now, academically speaking, the first chair in international relations was established at the University of Wales in 1919. So you see, it's a very recent discipline. The first two occupants of the chair were eminent historians, Professor Alfred Zimmerman and C.K. Webster. At that time, international relations as a subject was little more than diplomatic history. During the next 7 decades, this scope and approach of the subject has changed immensely. The nature and content, everything has undergone severe changes. Today, the analytical study of politics has replaced descriptive diplomatic history. The term international politics is now used for the new discipline that has been emerging since the Second World War. It is more scientific, yet very narrow as compared to international relations. So international relations was very broad, as we say that it talks about all the dimensions, but international politics is relatively narrow. It concentrates only particularly the behavior of the nations. So the two terms even sometimes now are used synonymously, but they have two distinct areas of content. So Hans Morgenthau believes that the core of international relations is international politics. Like I said, he said struggle for power is the basis of the understanding of this discipline. But a clear distinction between the two is to be made. International relations is much wider in scope than international politics, whereas politics among nations is struggle for power. International relations includes political, economic, and cultural relations. Okay. Harold and Margaret Sprout, they also opine that international relations include all human behavior on one side of the national boundary, affecting the human behavior on the other side of the boundary. And international politics, on the other hand, deals with conflicts and cooperation among nations, essentially at a very political level. Okay. Then again, Palmer and Perkins, they express similar views when they say that international politics is essentially concerned with the state system. So we can say that international relations is basically, very wide. It is the relationship between the sovereign states and also talks about all the dimensions. It takes into consideration all the dimensions which can affect the human lives. But international politics is much narrower in its scope, and particularly it concerns itself with the conflict and cooperation that exists between two different nations. Right. Okay, so next this is the scope. and the difference between international politics and international relations. Now, quickly, we will just see how it has evolved. So, what is the changing nature of international relations as a subject, as a discipline, and as an understanding? So, the context and nature of IR, international relations, that is, has undergone major changes after the Second World War. Traditionally, world politics was centered around Europe, and relations amongst nations were largely conducted by officials of foreign offices, mostly in secrecy. The common man was hardly ever involved, and treaties were often kept secret. Right? So, but today, public opinion has begun to play an important role in the decision making process in foreign offices as well. Thus, it changes the nature of international relations completely. Ambassadors, once they were briefed by their governments how to behave, and they were largely free to conduct relations according to the ground realities of the country of their postings. But today, not only have nuclear weapons changed the nature of war and replaced erstwhile the balance of power by the balance of terror, but also the nature of diplomacy has changed as well. Now the foreign ambassadors or the foreign government officials, they also do not enjoy as much freedom as they used to in the era before. So though we live in the jet age, and heads of the state and people who are important in government, they travel across the globe, meet each other, and establish contact, and that's how international relations also, they're building up, and it's no more restricted to very few people. It means to say, the understanding is that it involves more people now, and since more people are under its ambit, it is much wider. It's not that narrow now. So before the First World War, travel from India and Britain just to tell you, how it took about 20 days when you go through a ship, or now it takes hardly about 8 hours when you reach through a aircraft. So obviously the telephones, the fax machines, teleprinters, other electronic devices all have been handy, and they have brought all these leaders into direct contact with each other. The hotline communications between Washington and Moscow keeps the top leaders always in touch with each other, and this has reduced the freedom of ambassadors who receive daily instructions from their government. Now they have to behave in a certain fashion in order to protect their national interests. Decolonization. Decolonization means the process where the colonized countries, the countries which were governed and ruled by masters, the parent countries, they attained independence. So these decolonization process has also resulted in the emergence of large number of sovereign states. Now there are more independent countries in the world in comparison to the state of World War I. So the former colonies of the European powers, which includes India, of course, have become important actors on the stage of international relations. They were once silent spectators. Now they have a say. They participate in the world politics. Another important event is the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Now, this has also impacted because it resulted in creation of so many sovereign states and 15 new members in the UN. So instead of only 3 members earlier, now we have in the, very small countries are also permitted inside the UN. Very small countries like Liechtenstein, San Marino, Monaco, and Andorra, they are also admitted. Perhaps this whole process started with 1990s, 91, 92, 93. We see so many inclusions, and the total number of UN members, now it has gone to 193. It was 51 in 1945, and within this span of few decades, it has gone up to 193. That is what it stands today. So international relations now basically are conducted amongst a large number of new nations instead of only the old players. There are so many new players which are being added every other decade. Okay, so besides this, besides the basic sovereign states, besides this study, we also understand there are many non-state actors. Who are the non-state actors? Like the MNCs or the different transnational bodies, different groups which are, which are trying to uh, create some unpeaceful situations. The terrorist groups, they have been also, casting their own influence on these international relations in a very big way. With the collapse of Soviet Union, okay, as a superpower, the United States, however, has emerged as the supreme monolithic power and dominates the international scene almost without facing any challenge. The non-alignment movement, which is the NAM, non-alignment movement, it does still exist. We'll be taking it up in the last unit, the non-alignment movement. What was it, how it started, and whether it holds any relevance today or not. So the non-alignment movement, it still exists, but with the dismemberment of one of its founder members, that is Yugoslavia, the disappearance of the rival bloc. There were two blocs, USSR and USA. Now there is only one bloc which particularly exists, and also the role of third world, which has emerged in a big way. Uh, the relevance of NAM, non-alignment movement, is also under scanner, because it is somewhere, lost its relevance, or maybe it is emerging as a in a very different sense. So that we'll take it up in the unit 3. Okay, now, yes. So why do we study international relations? International relations is closely related to several disciplines, as I've already mentioned. These includes history, political science, law, economics, and geography. So what is the utility of studying IR as a separate subject? You know that no country lives in isolation. We cannot live in isolation. We are interdependent. Even when means of transportation and communication were very primitive or they hardly existed, then also, sovereign states did interact with each other through trade relations and something or the other. They cooperated and had frequent conflicts also. So relations were always generally studied, but they used to be studied under the heads of history and by political scientists. So diplomatic history was usually studied for understanding relations among sovereign states. During the second half of the 20th century, revolution in the means of travel and communication has not only changed the nature of international relations, but made its study essential for every enlightened person. We are today living in a very interdependent state system. Now, after COVID and Corona explosion, we also understand that, that this interdependence is not going anywhere. It's going to stay with us for very long. So it is essential for all of us to have a very clear idea of what is happening in the world around us. Political events are important, but even economic developments like trade, commerce activities, and role of MNCs are also no less significant. So we live in an age of growing international cooperation. Therefore, not only do the activities of United Nations and its numerous agencies are important, but also the regional organizations like SAARC, ASEAN, Organization of African Unity, and they also play a lot of role in our lives. International terrorism has been a concern for the humankind, and economic institutions like World Bank and WTO, they affect international relations. They have been, time and again, they have been affecting different relations between different states. So the study of international relations has therefore become highly useful and enlightening for students and for everyone else. As we have already discussed the scope, beginning quickly, we may just take a look at it. Beginning with the study of law and diplomatic history, the scope of international relations has steadily expanded. Okay. Now, with growing complexity of contacts between nations, the study of international organizations and institutions attracted the attention of scholars. The outbreak of the Second World War gave a strong stimulus to area studies, right, and strategic aspect of foreign policy. So this led to efforts to understand better the dynamics of national liberation struggles and anti-colonial movements. Okay, this is how it has undergone a change. Merely studying the events, it has come to study the behavior of a particular nation. The foundation of the United Nations during the war encouraged thinking about post-war restructuring, how to, make peace with each other. Basically, that was the idea. The study of cooperation became more important even as the study of conflict remained central. The immediate aftermath was marked by a constructive outlook. This is reflected in titles of books like Swords and Plowshares. These are some of the books which are very important. Ines Claude wrote it. New topics like ideology, disarmament, they have assumed very, very important, unprecedented importance in the era of Cold War. So did the system of alliances and regionalism. All these, the system of ally. This has become very, very important to understand the why certain nations behave in a particular manner. So contemporary international relations embrace the whole gamut of diplomatic history, international politics, international organizations, international law, and area studies, which was not present or not really relevant few years back, a few decades back. Writing about the contents of international relations, a few decades back, Palmer and Perkins had said that the then international relations was a study of the world community in transition, how it is changing, how it is evolving. But now it is even true today because this transition has not reached a terminal point. It has not ended. It has not stopped. This transition is taking place every day. We are witnessing a new change in the international scene. Okay. So while the underlying factors of international relations have not changed, the international environment has changed and is still changing. Hello, am I still audible? Can everyone hear me? Am I still audible? Hello? Hello, hello, excuse me. Can you hear me? Okay, anyway, continuing with the scope, what I was saying is that the transition has not reached a terminal point, and while the underlying factors of international relations have not changed, the international environment has certainly changed and is continuously changing, right? The state system is undergoing a lot of modifications. A technological revolution has taken place in a very big way. New states of Asia and Africa are playing increasingly important role. Now we see that new players from Asia and Africa are basically more active than anyone else. India in particular is in the position to assert itself and take rigid stance right from 1996 CBT or the question of signing it as a partner. So revolution of rising expectations is what Palmer and Perkins would say, that old and new elements must be interwoven with each other. But of course, there's a lot of change which we see in the contemporary era. So the focus is still the nation state system and the interstate relation, but the actions and interactions of many organizations and groups have to be considered. So we are not only, when we talk about, for example, if we are talking about the relations between India and USA, we are not restricting ourselves to only the events which are taken up at a political level or the exchanges between the top-notch leaders, but we are also concerned between the other exchanges in terms of different organizations, like the regional organizations, or whether it is concerning the climate change or the problem of migrants, etc., etc., right? So the world has so the scope of international relations in this century has become very fast indeed. The world has virtually become a global village, as we call it, and interdependence of the state has increased manifold. right? Economic relations between states, the role of international institutions, uh, and UN's role particularly. It's increased manifold times, right? So the scope of international relations thus has become vast, and besides international politics, it embraces various other interstate activities as well. That is what you have to understand and have to mention in your, answers. Right. So now, since so many things have undergone change within few last decades, and of course there have been different ways of looking at these developments. Okay, uh, as we understand, there are various perspectives and opinions to understand a particular subject. There is no unanimous agreement on how we have to view and we have to understand a particular subject, whether we are talking about political theory or your other disciplines. There is always one or many ways to look at one particular thing. So here also, within the international relations, we have different perspectives which we call approaches. The focus point of one particular approach would be on something, and the other approach would be on a different thing, and that makes it important as well as significant. But it's not possible to study all the approaches here, and that's why, though I'm going to open and throw some light on various approaches today, in particular we have certain approaches pre-designed in the syllabus that we are going to take up in detail later. So as far as the approaches are concerned, there are many approaches to study international relations. So let's take a look at them very briefly today. Chronologically speaking, there have been put in certain order of debates, how they have emerged in the world scenario. Two mainstream perspectives, mainly realism and liberalism, or let's say realism and idealism, have dominated the understanding and interpretation of international relations since the 1930s. This is called the first grade debate. Okay, so these perspectives one understood traditionally in terms of diplomacy, military, and strategic capabilities and methods of deploying them. Whereas the realism school considers the struggle of power as the central point of all international relations, the idealism, on the other hand, it believes in the inherent goodness of man. Okay, so realists like Morgenthau do not attach much importance to the morality, ethics, and all those questions. For them, national interest is the basic aim that must be served with the help of power. That's the core area. Idealists, on the other hand, or let's say liberals, on the other hand, they feel that the ideal of world peace is very attainable, very much attainable. We can live in peace with each other. With help of little reason, education, and science, we can, of course, establish a much better world. That's their idea. Okay, this is first grade debate between realists and idealists. We are going to take it up in detail later. The second great debate, which took place between behavioralists and traditionalists, that happened in 1960s. The first one in 1930. Now this is second great debate in 1960s. So this is the era of behavioralism, when behavioralism as an independent as an approach emerged in the political science discipline, and it talked about the behavior of actors, state or non-state, both state and non-state actors. It's talked about studying their behaviors. It's important. The criterion for explaining the international relations, the criterion now changed not only to the events but to the behavior of the particular state which is in question. And then the third great debate, as we call it, in the 70s and 80s, that took place. It is also called the inter-paradigm debate, because this was not only about difference between two eras, but also between two ideologies. So it is also called the inter-paradigm debate. This happened largely between the liberals and realists once again. But on the other hand, we had also the Marxists. You know, there was a new idea which emerged through the Marxists, and they started countering the existing liberals, realists, or behavioralists, all these kind of approaches at that time. This was a kind of a paradigm shift. This was the era of 70s and 80s. This is called the third great debate. Now, the fourth great debate is the last and the contemporary one, which is prevailing since 1980s. Basically, this is the debates which uh, started between the positivists and the non-positivists or the post-positivists. The positivists want their theories to be understood as objective knowledge grounded in facts. They believed majorly in facts. However, like for example, the realists, when they explain the world as an anarchical place, the states they behave through the zero sum relations. You know, the post positive base their stories in values and subjectivity. Again, that whole idea is somewhere revolving around the realism and the liberalism debate back in question whether we have any room or scope left for ethics or morality to seep in these international relations or not, right? The new age approaches like feminism or the green politics or the structuralism, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, all these will be part of the fourth great debates that started from 80s. So like feminism, they believe that the world is patriarchal, completely male dominated. So in order to achieve any, you know, any egalitarian output you want to see across the globe, first you have to talk about the inequality that exists between the genders. First, when we attain that inequality, perhaps then we'll be able to make more peace in the world. That's what the feminist take is, right? Okay, so this is all about approaches today, and we are going to take up the realism and idealism in detail tomorrow in our lectures. All right. Uh, okay. Uh, विशाल जी.
हेलो।
हेलो हेलो विशाल जी.
हाँ जी मैम।
क्या मैं अभी भी लाइव हूँ या टाइम ओवर हो गया है, क्योंकि मुझे क्यों बीच में दिखा रहा था.
मैम अभी तो
हेलो.
आप लाइव हो, अभी टाइम भी ओवर हो गया वैसे।
ओके, सो शैल आई कंटिन्यू या हम कल कंटिन्यू करेंगे.
मैम कल कंटिन्यू कर लेना।
ओके, ठीक है. ऑल राइट, थैंक यू.